The grammar of PowerPoint. In this video, we're going to talk about how you can create slides using shapes and other features that are available to you in the PowerPoint software. To this end, we're going to talk about the functions that you need to navigate in order to introduce shapes and other elements into your slide, as well as the ways in which you can position them to facilitate grammatical meaning and logical relationships. Let's start with the functions. When designing a customized slide, the most important feature on PowerPoint is the Insert tab. It's located on the top ribbon just to the right of the Home tab. Now, when you click on the Insert tab, there's lots of options, the most important one of which is going to be shapes. This one is absolutely crucial when you're constructing a slide that's customized to your needs. We also have icons, which is quite handy, as well as pictures. Now there's several other ones, including the table, smart art, and charts that are also handy, but you might not use them as often. Let's take a look at some of the options that you have under shapes, including lines. These are really handy because you can use them for all kinds of purposes. For example, the straight line you can use to simply underline a word. Now you can see that underline is a little thin, so if you want to make it thicker, just right click it and change the weight, and that makes it thicker. We can also use these lines to show directional relationships that are either one way or that go both ways. Below the lines, we also have the block arrows. Now you can choose an arrow that points in one direction and put it in whatever direction you want, or choose arrows that point in multiple directions. They also have different styles of arrows, such as this block arrow and these more stylized arrows on the bottom. Now, what's the difference between the block arrows and the lines? Well, these are technically shapes. That means you can put text inside of them, right? In addition, you can add outlines to them so that they stand out more prominently against the background. Perhaps the most useful options within the shapes section is the rectangles and basic shapes. You can see here that the rectangles come in different forms, such as a technical rectangle, as well as the soft edges and a combination. There's other shapes as well, such as circles and triangles, and you can use these to convey grammatical meaning, but we're going to go into detail about that a little bit later. As you scroll down, you'll find that they have a flowchart option as well as a stars and banner option. In the flowchart, you see they have things like the hourglass, a circle with a cross through it, a circle with an X through it. I don't know how creative these people are being with some of the shapes, but that's beside the point. Under the stars and banners, they have these explosions, they have scrolls, they have different pointed stars. Here we have the 6-point Star of David, but you can have 8 points, 10 points, 12 points, however many points you want. I usually use these for emphatic notes that I add at the end of a slide. In addition to shapes, you can also insert icons. When you click on the icons, you'll see they have a whole host of categories at the very top, which you can click on. And if none of those work for you, you can always go into that search box highlighted in yellow and enter a key term. Now, should you not be able to find an icon that's suited to your needs, there's a great resource online called thenounproject.com. And when you go there, they have literally tens of thousands of icons that are designed to be reflective of various nouns. So check that out and you'll get lots more options. Now that we know where to locate the shapes and icons, we want to know how to format them. Let's begin by creating a shape. First, we're going to select the shape in the Insert tab, or an icon if you prefer. Then we're going to left click on the slide where we want the shape or icon to be. And we're going to hold down and drag vertically and or horizontally until we get the desired shape. Now, resizing a shape is easy too. We're simply going to click on the shape, at which point a series of circles will appear around the perimeter of the shape. Now, depending on which direction or which way we want to resize the shape, we are next going to hover over a circle. In this case, we hover over the bottom right corner. Now a two-way arrow will appear and we can drag and drop the shape to our desired specifications. We might also need to move a shape, in which case we're going to hover over the shape until a cross arrow appears in the top right corner. When that appears, we can then left click, hold down, and drag and drop the shape like this. and move it to the location that we want. To rotate the shape, simply left click on the semicircle above the shape and drag it around, like so. We are also going to be coloring shapes. To do this, after we click on a shape, we're going to right click on the semicircle with the arrow that's located directly above it. This will bring up a menu that has two key features: the fill option, which will fill in the actual shape, and the outline, which will color the outline of the shape. Let's assume we're going to go to the fill option first. When we click on that, we get this color palette up. Now, our colors and font video goes into great detail as to how to use this feature. If you want to know more nuances about it, check that video out. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to cover the no fill option, which will make your shape transparent. We have the more colors option, which will allow you to choose from a broader range of colors and also change the shading. And finally, we have the eyedropper, where you can essentially copy and paste a color that's seen elsewhere on the same slide. Now let's assume in this case we're going to choose the color white in the very top left corner. We're going to click on that, and when we do that, it automatically changes our shape to the color white. We also want to color the outline. Here we have a light blue outline around the shape, which is the default color, but it doesn't match the purple background. We're going to get rid of that. Right click on the semicircle. You're going to go to outline instead of fill. Here, a very similar color palette comes up, but there are some subtle differences, such as no outline instead of no fill. Let's click on that, see what happens. Now we've gotten rid of that blue outline. However, the white color kind of blends into that light purple background. So we might want to go back and add a black outline. And we might want to increase the weight of that. When we click on this weight option, it gives us different thicknesses. The very thickest is 6. I don't usually use that, but just for the purposes of demonstrating what these outlines look like, let's take a look. And bam, we got this big, thick color, right? So now we can see that outline, and the white of the shape pops out a little bit more against the light purple background. In addition to that horizontal menu that pops up when we right click the shape that has both the color fill and the outline, there's also a vertical menu. It looks something like this, and it has several important features. The first of which is edit text. This allows you to put text into your shapes. Now, if you want to change the font size and color, in our video on color and font, we go into great detail about that, but it is a pretty intuitive and straightforward function. There's also the bring front and send to back options. These are handy when we want a shape to come to the foreground or go into the background, and we want them to be layered on top of each other. So you can move them around in that way. And finally, we have the format shape option, and this can be really handy for several reasons. After you select format shape, you get several options, one of which is no fill. Now you might wonder, what's the purpose of a shape that doesn't have a color to it? Well, you can use it for a text box. Here we've brought in the square, we've put no color in the background, no outline, and we've simply put the text on there so it doesn't interfere with the image that we have up front. We also have the solid fill option, and that's what you see on the left of the screen. There's a dark purple square, and we've put the text inside. The gradient fill is a little bit too busy. It blends colors, and it really makes it hard to find a font color that's going to stand out against all the different faded colors there. So we typically avoid that. Another option is the pattern fill. That gets a little bit busy, so I generally avoid that. And on the very bottom, though, is a really handy feature called transparency. So let's take a look at how this function operates. Let's say you want to create a Venn diagram. Well, you're going to want to make those shapes transparent. So when you bring the yellow over and then the blue, you're going to get a green in the middle. If you don't make these images transparent, you're not going to see that blended color. Instead, you're simply going to see the color blue sitting on top of the color yellow. We can also use transparency on images. If you want to learn more about integrating images into the PowerPoint slide, check out our video on that topic. Here we got an image, maybe it's related to one of our key themes, it's perfect, so we use it for a title card. Great. Here's our text, not so great, because no matter what color we use, it's going to be blending into some of the colors in the background. So what do? We make that image transparent and the text pops out far more clearly. Another option is we bring in some shapes, and then we put our text on the shapes. And that works out great, except for the fact the shape is now covering up the image. So we make the shape transparent and remove the transparency of the image, and now the reader can see both. And in this way, you're able to allow the reader to see your text as well as the image. And you can use this transparency in all kinds of instances. Maybe you have a paragraph where you want to highlight a certain word. You might create an additional rectangle to put on top of that word and make it yellow and then make it transparent so the word shows up through the block, but it also highlights it for you. Here's an example of a slide that you can build using all the features that we just talked about. You want to be creative, but just to give you a demonstration of the ways in which you can play around with these functions, let's deconstruct this slide and put it back together. So the first thing we do is bring up a triangle and then bring up a rectangle. And now we split the screen, but we want to add another layer to give this a little more depth. So we bring up a darker triangle and a rectangle of the same color. Great, now we want to bring in our header, but we want it to stand out. So we put a little border around it, but a no-fill header so that we can bring text inside. And then below it, another no-fill shape where we just have some explanatory notes. But we happen to have a lot of empty space on the side, so maybe we want to bring some images to correlate with those. Here, we bring in another triangle, and then 1, 2, 3 rectangles. Now, that's not quite what the other slide looked like. What else do we have? Well, we bring in a couple more rectangles to cover up those spots where the triangle overlaps. Now we have 3 new shapes, and we can bring in text with serialized points and corresponding images. Now, the great thing about this is you can do other options too. So maybe instead of a shape like that, you put in an image like Van Gogh and you send it to the back of the screen. And now it looks like it's been layered into the slide. So now that we understand the functions, let's take a look at how we can use these to facilitate grammar. When writing, we often show relationships by using transition words. However, moreover, therefore. However, PowerPoint slides require that you convey these relationships through visual cues. The Smart Art feature in the Insert tab provides quick options but are awkwardly spaced. In addition, under the Home tab, there's a Design Ideas feature that works in much the same way, but they don't always color code things the way you want. So use these features as a starting point, but try creating your own formats using these shapes. Maybe you have 2 opposing ideas. How do you reinforce that to your audience without using those transition words? Well, we're going to put shapes on opposite sides of the screen. Here we have one term, a note, another term, another note. And what we've done is reinforce the contrast between them through 2 means. First, one's on the left and one's on the right. Second, one is on the top and one is on the bottom. And we have these unconscious binaries that are already in our mind. So when you frame these ideas on the screen in this way, you unconsciously encourage the reader to see these ideas as being in opposition to each other. We actually used this earlier in the slide when I had the functions and grammars on one page. Now here we have left and right, we have top and bottom, but there's an additional function here. We have the colors of light and dark that are also contrasting. So now there's actually 3 different binaries working at the same time that are going to foster that dichotomous relationship between the 2. We often need to create hierarchies among our ideas and also serialize our thoughts. One of the strategies you can use in this context is to use different shapes. On the far left, you see we have the major heading, and it is in a hard rectangle, right? In addition, we've also put a frame around it so it pops out a little bit more than the subheadings. On the right side, you see the subheadings all have the soft rectangles. Now, in addition, within the subheadings, we've also gone from dark to light and from top to bottom. So we see this transition and gradual change between them. And that also reinforces the fact that these subheadings correlate with each other, but there's differences between them and perhaps a hierarchy as well. We sometimes need to make more specific relationships, such as sequential points. We have subheadings and maybe we use some graphics or icons to correlate with them. But if we want to serialize them instead of the icons, we can use numbers. And if we want to use both, we put the numbers on one side and the icons on the other. This can get a little bit busy. Try not to give the reader too much information and overload them with too much, but consider these different options and see which ones work best for you. Sometimes we're trying to convey processes and a simple sequence isn't enough. So, creating a very similar slide, we might add a shape like an arrow to suggest to the reader that this is a process that goes step by step. And if you don't like those triangles, you can always use an arrow instead and reinforce that messaging by serializing those steps with numbers. In addition to using vertical options, we can also use horizontal, where we go step 1, step 2, step 3, from left to right. This also fosters a sequential relationship, and rather than having smaller shapes from one to the other, we could put an even larger shape in the background that suggests the directional flow. Now, this is showing a forward progression because the reader not only sees from left to right, but they also see the arrow, and those things doubly reinforce the sequence that you have. In this case, I've left all steps as the same color so that they have a sharper contrast with that arrow in the back, but you could also consider going from light to dark or dark to light in this case. Perhaps you need explanatory notes to go along with the names of the steps, in which case you can add two rectangles, a darker purple, which is the name of the step, and then a slightly lighter medium purple, which is the explanatory notes. We still see that the names of the step are more important. Those darker colors are a little heavier, and then the explanatory note is below. Another option is to frame the images not only in a progression that goes from left to right horizontally, but also goes from bottom to top vertically. In this context, we create a figurative staircase that reinforces this idea that these are steps and not only shows a forward progression, but an upward progression as well. And that's a little more subtle, but this unconscious figurative staircase reinforces this upward progression. Note, if there are many steps, you can snake them around the slide, because if you simply use the steps, they're going to be much smaller and create a lot of empty space. Here we have step 1, step 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now we have those steps snaking around. Now this is a simple process, but if you want to make it a cycle, all you have to do is add an extra arrow leading back to the first step. And now we have not simply a process, but a cycle that comes full circle. Maybe you're introducing a hierarchy. We can use a similar structure to those points we used earlier. We start with level 1, build up to level 2, 3, 4, and 5. In this case, we've created a staircase again. We're going from the bottom all the way up to top, and we're showing this hierarchy. There are some other options here too where we can color code it. Level 1, again, it's on the bottom because it's the heavier, and the lighter colors are being built on top. But there's even more options. If we want to make it into a pyramid, we can make those levels smaller. Rather than equal size into a staircase, we have the broadest one on the bottom and we build up to the top. Now in this case, we could either bring them over to the right side or to the left side, or have them in the center as we did originally. A lot of our slides will simply be explanatory notes, so we don't necessarily need to convey overt relationships. In this case, we have our major subheading, so the reader knows what we're talking about, and it's in a larger font. We have an image, and then we have the smaller text. See here, this larger text is in caps, centered, and bolded, so it's formatted differently. The reader knows how important it is. Over here, we have a smaller text. It's sentence case, and it's left aligned. So we do see a change in importance based on whether or not we center it, whether or not we use all caps, and what size font we're using. We also use an image that's related to the topic and reinforces the text. This is extremely important. Over 70% of people are visual learners, so you want to make sure that your slides are visually engaging. If they're not, you're going to be losing the attention of a lot of people in your audience, and it's going to be more difficult for them to process and understand the messaging that you're trying to get across to them. Here's another slide, very similar format. So why am I bringing this up? Well, in this case, we have inverted the format to avoid repetition. In the last slide, we had the block note with the explanatory note on the right side. Now we have it on the left. You want to avoid the repetition and give your audience some variety. Special note, keep the text to a minimum. Here's a big don't. We got a biography on Nicolas Cage. Born Nicolas Coppola, his professional name, Nicolas Cage. We got some more information. Members of the family, we've got numerous awards, we got blockbuster hits, a whole list of them, and we got the cult classics and independent films and another list, and we even mentioned that he won an award. There are 96 words of block text on this screen. If you put this up here, your audience is not going to be engaged. So we need to know how to frame this kind of information in an engaging way. We need to break this text up. First, we're going to look at the biographical information. We got a picture of Nick Cage that we've added right away. Visual learners are engaged. We have his name up top, birth date, full name, family members. 1, 2, 3, and then the bulleted family members underneath. It becomes a lot easier for the reader to process this, and there's not a lot of text on the screen. Now we go to the awards. Again, heading, awards, bullet 1, 2, 3, and an image that correlates with the awards because he's holding the Oscar. In addition, we've also unconsciously showed a progression in his career. We start with a black and white picture, which is associated with more antiquated times, and he's a younger person in that picture. Now we've progressed to a full color picture, and he's a little older. So we're unconsciously reinforcing this progression of time throughout the slides. Now we have the blockbuster films, a heading, blockbuster, and then a bullet list of the films with corresponding images on the right for each of the films. In this context, we're not making the slide terribly engaging because it's still very still and all the information comes up at once. But we do have another video that goes through how you can animate these exact same slides to make them more engaging. Now we're on to the critical films. Again, the major subheading, critical films, darker color, larger font up top. We've even changed the color too. So it's white text up top, black text in the bottom. Then we have the bullets with the corresponding images beside, and even a little Oscar on the bottom right corner. Let's do a summary of the key takeaways. First, you want to consider spacing, both vertical and horizontal. How does positioning two shapes in opposing sides of a slide facilitate the grammatical meaning and logical relationships you're trying to convey? Sequencing. When you're sequencing ideas, what are the strategies that you can use when you're trying to encourage your reader to see things in a certain sequence, including numbers, for example? Shape style. How do different shapes encourage the reader to prioritize ideas, whether it's using a squared rectangle or a soft rectangle in opposition to each other, or adding things like triangles and arrows? We want to consider color, shape, and font as well. This is really important. You can go from dark to light, light to dark in order to facilitate logical relationships. And when we're talking about fonts, you can use all caps, you can use different sizes, you can use sentence case, and that's going to encourage the reader to see things from different perspectives. And finally, we also want to consider bold, italics, and capitalization. Now, I didn't talk too much about this in the presentation, but these are also strategies that you can use with your text in order to encourage the reader to put emphasis on certain words. But the key thing here is you don't want to distract your audience. All of these strategies are meant to foster grammatical meaning and to convey the logical relationships you want to express. Don't use colors and shapes that are going to distract your reader or things that are too busy. You want them to focus on your ideas, not the choices you've made using PowerPoint. That's all we have for this episode of the Grammar of PowerPoint. If you want to learn more about modifying the background of your slide and the font styles and colors, or if you want to learn about animations, transitions, and integrating images, check out some of our other videos. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.